Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus.
So let's see what's going on today. There's supposed to be a Ukraine ceasefire that may be happening. America sent their people to go check that out, and just hours after the U.S. agreed with Ukraine for a proposal for a ceasefire talks during Saudi Arabia, Russia launched a deadly attack on Zelensky's hometown. You know, the Russian town, trying to get it back from them. Everyone's upset at me all the time now. Just I can't even help it. I saw, like, I just made this like cute meme last week, which I posted up for the point of the show, and all I said was, and by the way, good to see you guys. Where was it? I found this bug in my garden post, but then also,
those are invasive. Those aren't from here,
dude. I know, right? Someone got really upset about that too, because I said the only good bug's a dead bug, and they're like, "Wow, you must like never go outside and just hate." I was like, "You must never read." So I guess we're, like we're all in this together.
Radio.
Yeah, wow, bro. But like, so I posted.
Did you read that book, by the way, or have you just seen the movie? I haven't read that.
I do love the book because it's actually really interesting, because it's like, it's a totally different experience, and we'll get into the show now in a second, because you brought that up. The book's not like the movie, and it's about these dudes who were mecha warriors. Essentially, it costs a lot of money for these suits that they're wearing, and so the suits will you don't want to die, but you'd rather die than break the suit. You certainly don't want to break the suit, because your family has to pay for the suit if you destroy the suit. So it's like, it's very important not to destroy our equipment, but a big part of it is they're remembering the classroom. And that's kind of the parallel there, is like remembering what they learned from their teacher at school. And they have some really interesting lessons that they don't have in the movie. For instance, remembering this idea of like, what do you do with a child? Do you punish that child? If you don't punish that child, then the child becomes spoiled, and then society will punish that child. And so it's a better scenario that a parent who loves the child is punishing that child, then this person ends up in a prison state and doesn't know how to behave themselves and conform to the demands and obligations of society. That's one of my favorite aspects of Starship Troopers.
I think there's an asterisk here that's like, if you're poor.
If you're poor, yeah. Which you are, because 99 or 98% of the society is.
So here, you and I had a debate over 10 years ago in front of Cafe Mare over something where I was confused. I thought you were talking about one author, but you were talking about another. And in this case, I believe,
when was that?
This is a long time ago, but the point is that what is your feeling on kind of this accusatory treatment of Starship Troopers, that it's kind of that in the mind of the author, it's indicated that he did have what we would call fascistic tendencies? Or is that
think they really missed
kind of.
Yeah, totally. And it's super ironic coming from woke people. That was what I think. If we were having this conversation 10 years ago, that was probably whatever my argument was. Is that a lot of these woke, fascistic, collectivist, authoritarian political correct people, militant woke. It's ironic because what is Starship Troopers about? Starship Troopers is about patriotism, but mostly about inclusivity. It's a world where it's this inclusive, universal. At a certain point, we all get together. International socialism emerges. The entire world is one. We're all humanity, right? And whenever you get down to it and you figure it out, when you have your lowest common denominator, then you're going to have a dynamic that's even bigger, which is not just Highland. That's what Reagan said. Can
I say that the only reason why I entertained this at all was because this was something that I had read from the director of Starship Troopers. That was his
totally as a victim of
and that's why I give it any weight, because I love that movie so much.
The movie's incredible, and I think it's one of those things where like the movie's as good but completely different than the book, but it's perfect that it is. But the movie takes from the victimization of this boy raised in Holland. The director was raised in Holland during the Nazi occupation. And what were they trying to do? They were trying to nationalize or internationalize with the Dutch and to say, you know what, you really are just part of our greater thing. We are all together. So inclusivity. It's all about inclusivity, because fascism, collectivism, inclusivity, these are all really connected ideas. And we can't just pretend that, you know, it's kind of funny. It's like, well, they're doing this and you're doing that. What's the difference? Like, well, they're the bad guys, you know, like they're assholes. It's like, well, yeah. What are you even doing to yourself by saying the only difference is your subjectivity? Because at that point, then you might as well be inclusive with fascism and acknowledge that you're part of this thing. And why are they bugs? I think that's a very Jewish concept that comes from Kafka concept. You know, it's this metamorphosis concept. Like, are you the bug? You know, and are you offended? And the movie takes us to a very Kafka place, even maybe more than the book does.
Right.
That, you know, I'm offended by the idea of a bug that thinks, right? It's not just that it's hard to believe. I find the idea offensive that the other side, these bugs, you know, which is the way people treat each other, that like it's dehumanization versus humanization.
Mm-hmm.
Is it wrong to compare this to I Am Legend?
No, that's fine, but I would prefer to compare it to Omega Man, right? Isn't that the...
What are we doing with I Am Legend then? It's a zombie thing? I don't quite follow.
Yeah, well, I mean, go ahead.
Or like the director's
cut. Not right where you're going, by the way.
I think the director's cut version, there was an alternate ending where we find out at the end that they were not trying to hurt Will. They were trying to actually help him in some way. So if you rewatch it through that lens, every step of the way, they're not harming him. They're like, here's how you can survive. But he doesn't give them the time of day because he just sees a zombie and he immediately starts slaughtering them.
You're saying you think that? Or is that what it is?
There's a deleted ending.
Alternate ending.
Yeah. And you have to wait. One of the keys to that is that the whole movie is about Shrek. Because he quotes Shrek verbatim the entire time. And if you look into the fright of Shrek and what it is to be dehumanized, the way the ogre is treated, it's hugely part of what...
You're making me I need to watch that then.
You need to watch it again. That's not a question. You have to. But also...
I love that. If you can see it, because I never would think that for a second, but now that you mention it, you're like, if you go through all the examples, it's like that Karate Kid thing where you find out who the real villain is, you know? Like,
one for me was the movie Prometheus, and there's a director's cut version of the intro that completely changes the entire premise of that whole entire movie. For the better. It blows my mind that they even changed it.
Tell me more. I need to know these things. This is way up my alley.
So in Prometheus, the director's cut version, they focus for the first like 5 to 7 minutes of the movie that these entities came to the planet and they had this like god substance. It was like a black goo, and that mixes with the water, and that ends up creating all this humanity. And that humans over time, they wanted to recreate this Genesis, and they ran out of this god substance. And after they ran out, they decided, well, we're going to make an artificial version of it. And that was what really slowly created the xenomorphs all to begin with. And that it was about humans playing God after they ran out of the substance they were given.
So
and that
gets confusing then. So then why
That's very
did the
much an
architects
option.
in later on when they go to this other planet? So you're saying that goo that they have isn't the original substance? That's a bioweapon that humans created?
Right.
Correct. Yeah, the original goo made fish and humans and cats and dogs and everything. It's like a yeast starter, right? It's like a like a bread starter for an entire planet. And then once humans realized what that was, they started using it for their own purposes until they ran out. And they got so addicted to use it. I'm, filling some blanks here, but they were like, no, we can't run out of that. So they ended up figuring out how to synthesize it, which turned into a complete, hellscape. But
this is Valentinianism, which is random because earlier today I was talking with Keith on the show, and we're talking about the Gnostics and what is the Gnostic idea of the separation of the demiurge to create a singular Sophia that's separate from Yaldabaoth. And Yaldabaoth is kind of the human mocking God that's creating in a veiled attempt to be like God. So we're essentially doing the same thing, which is not apotheosis. We're not quite getting to become God because we're made of the thing. We're doing the opposite of what we need to do. It shouldn't be apotheosis trying to become something we're not. It should be returning back to the primordial God-like state. So it's apokatastasis. But we're not working towards being, removing and shedding and purging and getting back to our pure self. No, we're trying to get rid of our pure self and become this thing, this ideal that we've created, right?
Dude, you're tripping me out. So I'm just like, I really want to entertain this here because what I'm thinking to myself is like in, traditional alchemy, like the term melancholia has to do with this black bile, which is basically like this black goo. And they had this whole treatment of this internal transmutative process and the role that plays. And it's also just the idea that enlightenment is on like the razor's edge of total despair and liberation, right? Like you could go in any direction because once you know that that there's nothing left to do, you can fall into despair or you can actually liberate yourself from this thing that you've been confined into. But the thing is that I really like that idea with Prometheus. Like I think there's really Scott and people probably actually this is like actually their religion in a sense, like at least like allegorically, like it seems like there's more to it like for them, I imagine, because it's just so explicit and profound. But like I just wonder like if that's like what they're relating to, like are we like doing like an externalization of this melancholic like substance like with things like graphene or whatever, like are we like, you know what I mean? Like because now you'll see like all the references to the black goo showing up again and again, but it's this external expression of something that was traditionally in the alchemical sense something that was related to an internal had transmutative properties.
What makes something black is the absorption of light, right? And it's the lack of refraction and reflection. So something that's not very reflective. And I think that's also something we saw in the nanotechnology Terminator movie. I forget like the 5th or 6th one. I don't know how many Terminators there are now, but there was definitely like this black goo graphene Terminator thing. And I wanted to bring it back to Omega Man because I Am Legend is a remake of Omega Man. And Omega Man takes it to, they're both really.
Omega Man, okay. I was wondering how Dr. Wily is gonna like fit into this, like Waterman.
No, because Omega Man is Charlton Heston as Will Smith, right? I know we're doing the Disney Castle version of reality here, and it's interesting. I don't want to take away from Legend. I Am Legend's important because the zombies are CGI, which means they're not real or they're not human. It's more dehumanizing the way that they do the zombies in I Am Legend, the way that they are like animalistic CGI special effects characters makes it easier in a post-Iraq war time to imagine just murdering them and treating them like they're not real, they're not like you, they're separated, something's happened and they're completely gone. And this is a scary thing that we experience, I think, with progression or modern medicine. We're like, well, these people don't even have souls anymore. We have to be very careful about that kind of logic. But in the original version of the movie, in the Omega Man, and I think it's also interesting, the Omega Man from a Nietzschean perspective is like the last man. And he's the last man, right?
Oh, yeah, I dig it.
Versus this Ubermensch kind of goal of apotheosis. And what was the deal? They created some sort of technological progress that led to a nuclear holocaust that kills most people. And what you end up with are, this is a guy who was going to be, I think Fonda was supposed to be the greatest MIT laureate doctor, valedictorian student. But now he rides around without a shirt on a motorcycle because that's all that's left of the world. And he's a free, easy rider kind of man, post Dennis Hopper perspective. And they meet, the Pink Panthers, excuse me, the Black Panthers, but there's some penguins around them. My God, I did do that.
Join the Pink Panther party. That sounds great.
I'm trying to show you the Omega Man, Luddites. So instead of having zombies, you have Luddites, and so the Luddites are very much upset because their whole society, and they look at them, they look like Freemasonic, occult. Maybe
like Beneath the Planet of the Apes, huh?
Yeah, and then that's connected to this too, in a sense. This whole world that's being created is these are the anti-progressionists who have been affected by technology moving so fast. I think it's a nuclear holocaust has led them to not be able to go out in the sun anymore. So they're almost vampires or something like that. But they use candles. They hate technology. And this is originally what the zombies were people that were against progress, that are fighting with this Nietzschean last man. I think that's a major similarity in those two stories, like these characters that refuse to allow for solving of these problems and say we have to learn to live with the problems that we have, right? Live in our constraints.
I've never seen this movie.
You've never seen Omega Man?
I've never seen Omega Man.
But did you know at least that I Am Legend is a remake of this film?
I didn't. I didn't even know you were saying Omega Man. I thought you were saying Mega Man, like the Nintendo game.
Yeah, no, this is huge, man, because I remember seeing it and I think I saw I Am Legend like not but a year or less, a few months maybe after I'd seen the original Mega Man, because I went on some Charlton Heston kick.
Thomas, you've seen Soylent Green?
Yes, absolutely.
You've seen the 10 Commandments?
Yeah, 100. I've even seen I want to say it was a Hollow Earth documentary narrated by Charlton Heston too.
You've seen Bowling for Columbine? I'm just gonna keep going.
You gotta be really careful with all these Charlton Heston movies. Is he alive still? My God, I hope he's okay.
He's
dead?
I think
he's dead. He died in 2008. Okay, it's okay.
He died in 2008. Did he die like right after Michael Moore filmed him and left the thing on his front door, like front porch? Ooh. Oh, that's rough.
Mine was 2002.
This was an NRA thing, huh?
That's 6 years after that.
Yeah, he was the ultimate like focus at the end of that whole documentary was just to, make him into the ultimate villain.
Right. So they interviewed him as he had just got his Alzheimer's diagnosis.
Wow.
Oh no! Yeah,
dude, what scum of the earth,
hands, man.
Yeah. But I think it's important to watch every Charlton Heston movie. I mean, he makes out with an ape, like there's a lot of things he does. And Omega Man is one where I don't think often they don't do this. I mean, most of the time I've seen a movie that is based on a movie, I think they want you to forget the last movie. So I Am Legend is one of those where I don't remember them even saying, now I want to look it up. I Am Legend Wiki. Do they even admit, they should just admit, right, that it's, let's look it up. Hopefully, I'm not just crazy here. I can be both crazy. Omega Man. Yeah, look. It's based on Matheson's novel, 1964, The Last Man on Earth, and 1971's The Omega Man. So again, Last Man. There's very much a Nietzschean aspect to this film, and that Shrek is the character that he's. What happens with Shrek, right? Why is Will Smith constantly quoting, and he sees this kid for the first time watching Shrek? And then he knows all the words still, so he says all the lines to Shrek. So this kid's being initiated into a ritual ceremoniously. During the ceremony, this master of the ritual, this is an entered apprentice or initiate, with the master of the ritual, who knows what's going to happen. And what happens in Shrek? Does Shrek become human? No, it's very Princess and the Frog, right? Instead, the princess and the return to the primordial fright that exists is something even older than the human, the anthropomorphic, or God. I mean, if man is in the image of God, then it's the rejection of God in a lot of ways that is Shrek.
Was it in 2001: A Space Odyssey? Bowman's basically Nietzschean's last man. So, also Sprech Zarathustra dun 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 dun. Like that's like what it's speaking to in terms of evolution, and you have the Ubermensch and all this stuff. Like, but he is, as far as we're concerned, as far as the audience is concerned, the symbolism of the film, he's the last man. The Star Child is then whatever emerges from us, but it's. Oh, you're muted.
I'm not sure if he's the last man so much as he's the first scion, because he's the first human to make the bridge. He's the first Ubermensch.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was getting at. Maybe that's not. I mean, he's obviously not on Earth, but I mean, he's the I don't know how to explain that. Kind of like the zenith point of the culmination of all of humanity and into one figure at the end. You know.
And it's sort of this idea of, to become the Ubermensch, he needs to be completely separated from humanity. And so he's isolated, and you see him living in this utter isolation. There's a movie made by the, what's his name? The alien, from the Blink-182,
Tom DeLonge.
Yeah, Tom DeLonge. Love, I think, is the name of the movie.
Oh.
Have you seen that? Which I think is very closely related to at least the third act of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I saw this late at night one time when it came out. That was a long time. That was a long time ago. But yeah.
Well, this is this ISS set built in the driveway to
my God.
that movie. I mean, it's actually. I mean, I thought it was a pretty decent movie. I think a lot of people didn't get it, and it's not maybe made for everyone to love. A movie called Love, ironically.
Ultra.
There's multiple things going on here. One is the search for the architecture, and so they show the scenes in the 1860s or so of a Yankee Union battalion that is discovering the artifact, which is this sort of Black Knight satellite that's being found, and they're trying to hide it. And this very Masonic general who's talking about, the secret that's being kept and how this is the Nietzschean evolution of humanity that they're finding, and even showing like humanity in that place and how different humanity was in the 1860s. The guy writing in cursive, wearing a uniform, using this technology that was available. This sort of last man idea is very strong in the Love film. And simultaneously, they're showing this astronaut who all of a sudden can't get in touch with anybody and is isolated. And he goes through this very strange isolatory period, which is very Bowman, but maybe even more Bowman than 2001: A Space Odyssey, because you're seeing the struggle of this man losing connection to everything he considers humanity.
Right.
Leads to him becoming the Star Child, essentially. And it shows
that's the gospel. It's this classic thing. I think Joseph Campbell used to speak to it a lot. And it's also in, Thus Spake Zarathustra, that, in the Bible, in what Matthew, where Jesus goes into the desert, this kind of, and it's even in the Old Testament, kind of reflects the 40 years wandering in the desert. But that journey, the soul quest, where he goes out, then he has to face off with Satan in this, where Satan is challenging him in these different ways. He has to kind of prove himself. But it's that separation that's speaking to, once again, that transmutative alchemical process, like that's fundamental to it. So like with the symbolism of, at least, of 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's total isolation and complete removal. So it's like it goes beyond this like wandering off into the desert and fasting for 40 days, face off with the the adversary. It's like it's deeper than that. But I mean, what is Hal?
But that's actually
that same challenger in the same biblical sense, right?
I hadn't, it's funny. I hadn't thought about it like that before. Like Christ as the last man, 40 days in the desert. That's really interesting. There is something to this. Is this something that you've thought of before? To go into
a lot, yeah. So like that idea too of like the idea with Jesus, that whatever it was that he did, everyone is ultimately capable of. And because it's within the ability of the organism to have this transmutation, it's ultimately everyone's destiny down the line. Because in the fractal nature, people come out of people. If as soon as one person shows what the next evolutionary step is, like not just like in a belief sense, but like in an ultimate sense, like something physical happened, then we're all headed towards that, whether we like it or not, or whatever we think about it. So I think that was kind of the argument for Christianity, where it's like it doesn't really matter. Like, this is what's the problem with the church, is that it's all about knowledge, which is so funny because Jesus is supposed to be the answer to the problem that was started in Eden, right, with the tree of knowledge. So he's supposed to be the solution to that. So why would the gospel be the good news that we're spreading, which is just giving people a bit of knowledge? And it's kind of like, in the Who's Tommy, when they're like, Tommy doesn't know what day it is, he doesn't know who Jesus was or what praying is, so how can he be saved? It's like that's missing the mark of what the whole point is ultimately seems to be communicated in the gospel. It's not about a new piece of knowledge, it's about our destiny. So like, and that's what I feel like Nietzsche was kind of getting at in a lot of ways. Like, if you look at his book Antichrist and also Thus Spake Zarathustra, even though a lot of people put that down because they see it as this kind of like pompous megalomania, like ego thing, but like I really think he was like, when he's saying God is dead, he's talking about what the church is. Like, he's not talking about the ultimate sense. Like, he's obviously a deeply religious person. It's just not in that like, here's a bit of knowledge and this knowledge is going to save you, because it's so much deeper than that. That's the old, like, that belongs to the old order. That's not applicable to wherever it is that we're going. Is just more knowledge, right? Because what can you do with knowledge? It's like it's a there's nothing really to hold on to. You know what I mean?
When you talk about the 40 days in the desert, where do you stand on the astrotheology aspect of that? Because one of the, I think, explanations when you get into the astrotheological stuff is that Venus is the morning star until it disappears, and then it's gone for 40 days and it reemerges as the evening star. And that's one of the references I've heard related to that, but I don't really get being lost in the desert part.
Right. I think it has to do with mem. Like, so the gematria of the Hebrew letter mem it's water. So if you spell out the letter mem, it is the Hebrew for water. And so the one, like, and even like the mana, like, literally translates as what is it? It's actually a question. Like, they don't know what it is. So it's this idea of like the hidden sustenance. It's why like the camel is associated with Gimel. Like, I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but it is applicable. Like, the high priestess is that hidden resource. It's like the spiritual waters. So there's this idea too of like, Moses hitting the rock and the water comes out, and people, you're in a place where that there has to be a resource that's beyond just what we normally relate to as resources, that the spiritual dimension is accessible, and it requires that like wandering and searching and isolation to go and find what else is beyond this realm. The idea is that the camel being associated with the high priestess is that the camel holds the sustenance in its hump, and it's like it's the hidden sustenance, just like the spiritual resource is something that you can't find in the material world.
It's not that hidden. You can look at a camel and be like, hey, look, there's the hump.
Right, but it's symbolism, I guess, is what I'm saying. It's just a symbolic communication of the principle.
It's not as hidden as like the man standing in the camel on a pack of camels.
That's the child urinating on the pack of camels on the camel.
Right.
The statue, I forget what that's called. yeah. That's for real. That's where the artist was from. Was the place that has that statue. So
do you think the empress, the high priestess, has something to do with the rich man's needle through the camel, the eye of a needle?
Yeah. It's the cross that Dalet and Gimel in the Kabbalistic tree, they form a cross. So you have the two feminine aspects. So that's what's the sacrifice is Shekhinah. That's why the Shekhinah as Malkut is at the base of the whole tree. It's that it's something that's most sacred has been pushed to the bottom, and that the archway that's standing, that's holding together our empire in this interim, is like a replica of that. So we have a representation of the feminine and not the thing itself. That's why, like, in my personal understanding, I think like what's happening with society with this whole trans thing and everything is like, it's just this aversion coming to a head of like what is actually was pointed to as what the Shekhinah is. It's like we've taken that substitute as far as we can, to the point where we can't even bring ourselves culturally, it's getting to this point where it's like it's hard for even people to be able to define what a woman is unless if it's a man. Like, it speaks to this conundrum that's communicated in Zohar about what, like, our own aversion to ultimate femininity, like the realities of what the feminine principle is, so it's heavy.
Well, to quote Kindergarten Cop, no, I'm just kidding.
Oh yeah, thank you. No,
you done this before. Yeah,
that's
exactly.
it. Yeah, but then apply that what the child says in Kindergarten Cop to like the actual archetypes that are beyond what we're relating to on in the superficial sense. You know what I mean?
Honestly, this ties back into Prometheus and the Alien franchise in a small way too, because this one is less subtle, but if you watch some of the later movies in Prometheus, it's really a story about saving the feminine. It's everything is about the women. They're the only ones that survive. They're the only ones that get attacked. They're the only ones that happen to do any kind of active role in those movies.
It's so true. And if you look at Prometheus and Covenant, what's the focus? It's got a different relationship to Christianity. And it's more speaking to what I'm speaking to, actually.
Virgin birth. But all those alien movies are about virgin birth, essentially.
It's so true. Like, dude,
this is a little off, but like just because of like the Mr. Mom movie. Also, like, is it wrong that I think Pamela Reed is hot? And do I only think she's hot because she looks kind of like Lola Bunny? I mean, I don't know if that's.
She reminds me a little bit of the dad in Beetlejuice.
That doesn't help at all. Oh, but yeah, I get it. I actually see what you're saying there. They're probably related. They're probably from the same tribe. Yeah.
So by the way, Tool's album 10,000 Days syncs with the Prometheus and Covenant. Like I have that. I think I have that on Twitter too, but it's definitely on my website. But yeah, the two films together with 10,000 Days. 10,000 Days is a Christian album. So like, oh yeah, this is something I was gonna talk about in a minute. But
yeah, we'll bring it up in a minute.
Show. But so 10,000 Days is like a Christian rock album that's actually like incredibly good. Like I think what he was reconciling stuff with his paraplegic mother, Maynard, and his whole process around Christianity with 10,000 Days. But like, oh, you found it, boom. Yeah. So, but everything that this album speaks to, as far as I can tell, is the exact same thing that Prometheus and Covenant are speaking to in terms of Christianity. So it might take a.
You can find this on my page on the top of it right now. You can also look for MK Ultrasound and Prometheus, and that was what I did to find it at the very top of the page. So I would highly recommend checking that one out. It's also cool because Tool, he doesn't love that. Yeah.
If we're just talking space movies, well, eventually we'll find some syncs here. But have you guys? I'm sure you've seen Moon with Sam Rockwell.
So good.
Yeah. One of my favorite space movies of all time.
What's the deal? So Kevin Spacey is the voice of Gertie. Gertie obviously makes me think of Drew Barrymore in E.T. Right? That was her name in E.T., Drew Barrymore's character.
Right.
So like, but it's kind of, yeah. So it's Hal. Hal is played by Kevin Spacey in this movie, which is kind of funny because like Kevin Spacey's voice kind of reminds me of whatever his name is. I forget the guy.
I didn't even realize that until you just said it. Kevin Spacey is Hal 9000 in Moon.
Yeah.
Totally. I don't know if
as Gertie
like that or don't like that. I almost feel like it's a snapshot in time of both.
I have no problem with it whatsoever because I loved K-Pax. I thought that was a fun movie, right? Didn't you like K-Pax? How could you not? That was a fun movie. Admit it. No?
I like the concept.
Wasn't K-Pax like a reference to Aleister Crowley's Nox Ohm Pax, which is about?
I thought it was Chaos Peace. I thought it was about Chaos Peace from Chaos. I thought that's what they were going for, but I could be
probably
wrong.
Maybe both. Because I mean, I think Nox Ohm Pax, isn't it the same meaning from Crowley? So
Crowley, Pax. What am I looking up again?
I say it because you could extrapolate stuff about Iowas from this, his alien contact thing. And also this movie K-Pax deals heavily with the MK Ultra with the Bluebird, where the Bluebird hysteria scene where the guy's just freaking out because he sees the Bluebird. He's like totally been experimented on, so he's just all losing it.
Totally. Yeah, and the rose-colored glasses. I thought this was a great movie. I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen it since it came out, which is when 2001. Yeah, so I was 12 years old. So granted, I might have been a little, I mean, I haven't seen it since then, and I liked American Beauty and anything Kevin Smith did in 2001 when I was 12 years old. I don't know what that means about me.
I felt like K-Pax was just the alien version of Michael. Where
which I
John
like.
is the angel. It's like the same movie.
Dude, Michael's great. It's a great one. Miracle too. Okay. What about Drew Barrymore thought that E.T. was real? You know about that? Or is that like not the time to bring this up?
No, tell me about it. What do you got?
Well, I mean, like Drew Barrymore was 7, and she thought apparently in her interview, she said, I believed E.T. was real. And she has this whole thing about like they didn't explain to her that it was a puppet and that there's a person in the suit, and she was young enough that she took that they're really what ET really did tell her not to smoke. You know what I mean? As a child.
Dude, did Heather O'Rourke think that Poltergeist was real?
See, that's the thing is like, are we crazy for thinking that ET's a puppet? Like,
Did
honestly,
they want her to
well-
think that ET was real, and that's part of what that we're like. We really want to get
Had
this
to.
reaction out of this kid.
every
Bring out the
reaction was
doll.
so
Don't let
real.
her. Don't whatever you do. Don't let her see it with its head off.
I mean, yeah, it's like Alf, but more. Alf was pretty importantly real. I mean, but I can only imagine that they did this on purpose for the purpose of.
When she screamed right there when he lifts his head, that was probably like they're like, okay, we can't. Don't let the cat out of the bag. Let Drew Barrymore think this is what's happening now. That was like a real scream. I've always thought that. I was like, wow, how did they get Drew Barrymore was such a good little actress when they did that.
Yeah, well, she believed that it was real. So then they have to wonder, was there even really a puppet at all, or did we just see a puppet because it was like the same as Area 51? They want us to think that AT's not real so that we can handle the story. Suspension of belief, and then she is suspension of disbelief.
Well, you've seen the original conceptions of ET where he's terrifying when it was originally set to be a horror film from
I didn't know this.
Baker, what's his name? The guy God, he did all this stuff for Industrial Light and Magic. I forget his name, something Baker. But yeah, if you look at the original ET conceptions, you're going to see something really freaking scary.
The original ET puppet.
Yeah, well, it's not when it was a puppet. It was like a well, I mean, it was like, well, that's later. That's after it decayed. But no, God, what was his name? Rick Baker. If you type in Rick Baker with it, original ET Rick Baker, something like that.
Let's see here. Original designs for ET are here to devour your childhood. Well, that's. What do I have to click to see the pictures, man? I mean,
yeah, there should be somewhere. Let's see. It says Night Skies there because it's the original. So it's very similar to Critters. The original idea for it is kind of like Critters and Gremlins. I mean, Gremlins, ET, and Poltergeist all came out of the same script.
Oh, okay. So this was kind of
that's not even that's one, but that's not. Oh, there it was.
Right here, yeah.
Oh, these guys, yeah. There's other ones besides these, but these he would. So they had Close Encounters of the Third Kind with the peaceful alien thing, and then that was yeah. So ET and Poltergeist, that's one of the arguments for like they're the same length. Like Poltergeist and ET are like that have so many correspondence between them. It's absolutely nuts. Like if you start counting all the parallels and that they were filmed at the same time, like it looks as though their sets overlap. I don't think they necessarily do. Like, and you'd think they have the same golden retriever in both, but it's actually a different dog. But yeah, so
of the touch.
So I mean, all things being equal, I'd much rather be Elliot in this comparison, especially if you consider the real world ramifications.
Elliot is the male version of Heather O'Rourke. The same thing's happening to both characters, and it's the life force. So the next movie that Tobe Hooper does after this is called Life Force, right? So they say in Poltergeist that the beast is after her life force. So like that's what's happening with Elliot. ET is hijacking Elliot's like immune system or whatever, his energy, his life force, in order to exist in this realm. So like
I got banned from
as much
Facebook for like 30 days because I made a meme with a picture of the Life Force lady. I forget her actress name. What's her name again?
It doesn't surprise me.
She's so hot, though. That's all I can say about it.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is, right there. I shouldn't even be showing this because it used to be like Pavlovian dog trauma.
ET is the beast in Poltergeist. Like they're the same entity. So like I'm convinced of this. Like I watched them both with Transparency with Mogwai, but like even just in the first place, like they both end with Kubrick references. First of all, the last door that you see as it's going along at the motel at the end of Poltergeist is 217, which we know is the number of the equivalent of room 237 in the book The Shining, right? So and then ET ends with the drum roll from Thus Are Also Spake Zarathustra, the song from 2001: A Space Odyssey, when the rainbow goes, when the ship takes off, So you have like they're both drawing from the same stuff, but so like ET is using Elliot for his life force in the same way that the beast in Poltergeist is using Heather O'Rourke for her life force. Like the same thing is happening, but it's like a litmus test because we're looking at ET and we want to treat ET as this adorable, loving alien because he's got the glowing heart deal and everything. But he's, it's weird. Like, and at the end of ET, when he's like, "I'll be right here," and he takes his Jupiter finger and he puts it, like, you'd think he'd point to his heart, but I think this is an example of a Mandela effect for some people because he points at his third eye. ET like points at Elliot's third eye. It's like, "I'll be right here." It's so weird. But yeah.
Don't plants wither around ET as well?
Yeah.
Well,
all kinds of things happen if they want to take the energy from things, but probably that infers that he could use, if he was in a very healthy circumstance with more Jing or Chi. We were talking to Keith earlier about this. The more energy that he could put it back into nature. So maybe an entire world of ETs is a tropical paradise.
Because there was the book that came out after the movie, right, where he goes back to his home planet, and that's a large concept of that. It was like spreading energy around and growing plants.
Yeah, it might be kind of like ejaculating or taking a nap for him. Like if you want to get yourself exhausted, you want to tire yourself out, you just use a little life force to make a little more life elsewhere. You put it into the nature. And I think that was also the point.
Sounds more Crowleyan than K-Pax.
No, I think we all thought that Steven Spielberg was pretty Crowleyan, though, right? Like that's not new.
Well, yeah. Heather O'Rourke, yeah.
Oh my God, every time. I don't know. We were also thinking about that movie, Battlefield Earth, just because I was thinking about how these kids are staring at phones nowadays, and how horrible it is that kids are staring at phones isn't any more horrible than kids staring at TVs. And that everyone's saying watching TV is so bad for you, watching your cell phone. Look, these kids are like brainwashing themselves. What would happen if you spent your whole life staring at a screen? And I was like, wait a minute, I resemble that remark. That's me. I'm that, and like, I don't know if I'm a great example of something you want. I'm not the poster child for what you want your kids to be necessarily, but at the same time, I don't know. I feel like it goes back to the learning machine from Battlefield Earth, where you have all these Untermenschian slaves that are being trained by these Ubermenschian aliens that are trying to harvest gold with them. And he ends up using this sort of teleprompter to install ideas in their mind. And this, to me, is very Poltergeist to an extent as well. This idea that the kid's obsession with the veil from the other side, and that this energy is connected to the Native Americans, to this kind of timeless flow between the veil, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's how The Shining connects to Poltergeist, is because in both cases you have the burial ground. And so, and the symbolism is one of like, if you whatever something's built upon, it has that thing that was there before, like actually like coming up through it and into it. So there's no like, it has to do with like repression and sublimation, right? So like when at the end of Poltergeist, and he's like, "You moved the headstones, but you didn't move the bodies, didn't you?" Like, and then like in The Shining, when he's like, we had to fend off several Indian attacks while building the Overlook, it's like, because it's built on ancient Indian burial ground. The guy actually says in Poltergeist, he goes, "Relax, it's not ancient Indian burial ground. It's just, yeah." So it's trippy.
Yeah, the blood that goes to the veil. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that. Let me go back to your link here. You posted this 42 minutes episode.
Oh, so yeah, there was a comment on the video from last week where somebody was saying like David needs to wake up. Israel funds Hamas, and then somebody commented that his rabbi will say that that's a lie or something like that. And I just wanted to point out, like, if you look up, do me a favor, Andreas, if you look up the Rabbinical Council of Jewish Voice for Peace. So if you can type in Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinical Council and pull that up and scroll down. So if you look here, there's a Rabbinical Council, and you see that this includes BDS here, which is what do we got? Scroll down a little bit. You can see examples of what they're doing here. So go back up a little bit. So it's boycotting, it's divestment, and it's sanctions having to do with Israel. So this is an activist group that's like kind of the activist group that goes pretty far back for protesting against the goings on of the state of Israel. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Jewish Voice for Peace, right? They say this here.
Thank you.
Boycotts,
So,
investment sanctions, BDS.
so if you go back to the previous site that you were at,
Let's just look at the
Sure.
logo for a second.
Yeah, check it out.
Have you seen this thing? This is freaking nuts, right? It looks like
Yeah.
that's just what is going on with this? Like he's got the Libra scales behind his back, and he's the hair. I mean, just the patch. I mean, this is a very strange logo. In
Totally.
So many ways. All right. Okay, so I'm sorry, you wanted to show.
So go to the Rabbinical Council page that you were at before, and then
For
scroll
sure.
down into the names. There's not that many. So if you look at
More than
here,
you
you'll
think.
see.
a lot of
Okay, so hold on, just somewhere in the middle. Hold on. I'm looking for a specific name, and it's my rabbi. So scroll up a little bit more. It's gonna say
That's
Rabbi
crazy.
Baruch Goldberg.
Group?
There it is. Rabbi
Yeah.
Baruch Goldberg. That's my rabbi. So like
Yeah.
he's on the Rabbinical Council of an activist group. So like for over a decade, when we
He's like,
studied,
I know what we
I
need to
heard
stop doing. Yeah.
I've heard every criticism about Israel from my rabbi. So I just wanted to like my experience of like looking at that comment of, you know, his rabbi will tell him that that's a lie of Hamas. I've heard
Ironically,
like,
the
and so like
opposite.
this is like
He's
if you want to understand me a little bit
about it and criticizing it. He's
Yeah,
like, we
so
really
the
got to stop this and build an organization against that and acknowledge what's going on and see if we can make it change. You know,
right, exactly.
Same.
And so like I just want to express to people like experientially like where I come from is like my meeting with my rabbi, like I'm somewhere between things. So like when I look at like what RFK Jr. has to say, and then I'm aware of all the things my rabbi has to say, I'm probably somewhere in the middle, you know, but I'm an individual, so like I have my own perspective, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like I don't like when it comes
you
to
know
Israel stuff, it's like, dude,
you know.
I can't even. So
I feel
yeah,
the same
and-
way every time because it's like just because we know people that are on both sides of that argument, and I get this is what it started out with earlier when I was showing the picture I put up of Vance and Zelensky and Trump with like, you know, Wojak meme heads. It's like I have people that I'm friends with who even have decided that they can't talk to me ever again because I'll show one side of an argument or I'll show both sides of an argument. Then
Yeah.
you'll have next week, people from the other side who are happy. They're like, thank you for pandering to me last week. This
Right.
week, you know, why are you pandering to them? It's like, well, you just get that I'm aware that you all exist in this world, and I think it's hysterical that you all
Totally.
think, you know, that you're the only ones.
So
that have
here,
the
so
opinion.
check out that link that I sent in the private chat. If you could
Yeah.
share that again.
Go
So
back to it.
yeah, so this is from the Sync Book website because we published my rabbi's book called Spill Blood. If you scroll down a little bit here, so this here is a talk with my rabbi from years ago from 42 minutes. Our kind of our sister podcast for Always Record back when he lived directly across from the Giant Dipper in downtown Santa Cruz. So the whole time he's talking, you can hear people screaming, which is he's like on
weirdly
location.
ironic.
He used to live in Israel, but it's Spilled Blood, a False God in Real Estate. This is his book, and the whole thing, if you scroll down a little bit, you can see where it says purchase, but this is this is a small book, but the size of the book is the actual physical size of what it was that he did. The whole thing, I don't know if you can jump into it, they can show you that, but I can bring it out maybe. But this is all like hand done with fountain pen. So like the size of it, so he like used a magnifying headgear to like actually like do this whole thing, and it's all his own poetry, but it's all this criticism of the state of Israel way before it was ever in vogue as it is now. So like I like just expressing like my experience is like I have this kind of like working knowledge through him of like these very specific criticisms, very direct criticisms of Israel. And then I look and see footage and all this stuff around what college students have been doing since October 7th. And knowing a lot of the things that I know, I can't help but see like a lot of their treatment of things just so far removed from the realities as I know them, that even though like I've attended so many meetings with Jewish Voice for Peace, I've participated in like people who are doing like serious boycotts and trying to work for sanctions and all this stuff. And then meanwhile, I'm like looking at some of the stuff coming from the colleges, and I'm like, oh my God, they have no idea what the fuck they're talking about a lot of the time.
Ceasefire now. Buy the T-shirt. You know,
right.
Like,
So like I don't know. I just want to put that out there. care if people think I'm like, oh, he's I don't know, like whatever they think I think. It's just yeah. It's
Where's Rabbi
They think you
Goldberg
can
at
only
on
fit
9/11?
one. They think you can only fit one thought in your head at a time. That's the problem they don't understand. But sorry, Thomas, we were going to ask where's
Where's
help
Rabbi on 9/11?
my rabbi was with me for the whole process because we transcribed Zohar for over 10 years, but we spent 2.5 of those years transcribing the 2 sections of the Zohar that predict 9/11 overtly to the day and year. Like it's
kind of a big deal.
it's the biggest deal of my life in terms of my own studies is that and what we did with that, because I brought that to him. I saw that reference by somebody who Andreas has interviewed, Leo Zagami. He made a statement that was kind of like matter of fact. He's like 9/11, that's in the Zohar. So I went and I dug to see what references that was, and I spent 2.5 years. As far as I know, like I don't know anyone else who's taken the time to translate that. It's not something that exists in English. The commentary from the Zohar from Ramak from the 16th century about that. So like I have that written out. I had it written in longhand. My friend helped me transcribe that so that I could actually have it in text form. So like I that's like a lot of work, but it's explicit. So like and what 9/11 is all about, and like it's not what the way that the treatment of people, like I'm convinced that like the Wachowski brothers, sisters, whatever, like that they had at least access to the first section of this, which is much smaller, which is also reads kind of like propaganda, where it's like Israel will act mightily and this and that. Like the reason why 9/11 is on the passport in the Matrix for 2001 9/11, like the reason why that's there in my view is because of access to this stuff from the Zohar. So like I don't know that in any absolute terms, because unless if they told me directly, I could just call it a sync or whatever.
It kind of bothers me how far people have fallen. So like I mean, just like 25 years ago, we were all aware that the world changed so much. I was just rewatching that show, That's My Bush. The show about Bush as a sitcom president, and just it's crazy. It's a perfect pivotal explanation of how different the world is now and how different it was then. But really, you can see the changes when they canceled the show, because September 11th changed America. At a certain, we could have Skull and Bones. This is the episode where Bush has his Skull and Bones frat buddies. Remember coming to the White House, and he has to prove he's not soft. So he is going to invite them to an execution, but he has crisis actors for the execution who are all an improv troupe. Like the level of where we were in 2001 was insanely just like it was just an open portal with babies pouring out. And then September 11th, boom, everything changes. We have to take everything to a new place of authoritarian, scared, safety, with the restriction of your freedom was so it's insane. And I don't think people really get anymore the way we used to really focus on this point. And we made episodes, and you made the Sync books, Sync Press, all this amazing evidence of how the world shifted so quickly and why we predicted this would shift. But yeah, like in the Matrix, they kind of make that point. September 11th, 2001 is the death of his passport. Why is it important that his passport agency, so his free agency from Capital City? There's just so many levels to this, which seems so clear. Thomas Anderson, son of man, doubting Thomas.
It's also twin. Thomas means twin. Think about that.
I hadn't thought about that at all. No,
right.
There you go. There's just like, you just can't help it with the references in this thing. They did this so hard, so fast, and I don't think anyone remembers anymore what the world was like. I honestly, it's hard to explain to people what it was like to live in a free world. The world was so free at some point. I mean, yeah, September 11th. So why do you think that that's the case from your understanding of the Zohar? I mean, I know we've talked about this to some extent, even with the Back to the Future predicts 9/11. But why is, tell me, Cassandra.
Well, like I say, that there's 2 sections. The first one is much shorter, and I think more people have been given access to this. I'm not talking about the commentary from Ramak, which is really the enlightening thing of it that I got the most out of. But like the 2 sections, like the first one has these statements where it's like Israel act mightily. And like Israel obviously isn't a nation until, late 40s in 19th century, but you know, if you consider like the treatment of it is kind of like, it reads like propaganda kind of, whereas like the second section, especially with the commentary, doesn't speak highly of Israel in the future. So it's like following this event that happens where these two strongholds and a palace are destroyed. It says that the king will be killed, but then when you look at the commentary, it says the king that's killed is actually Samael. It's an archetypal king. It's the king of the demons. It's not a physical king. And so it makes a whole point of that. But it says that the whole world witnesses on one side of our brain, in the collective hemisphere of humanity, we all saw the king of the demons die on September 11th, 2001, or that we will. And then following that, there's an interim between that event and the implementation of a one world government. And so that interim is basically characterized by this, what it describes as kind of this cognitive dissonance of us to come to terms with what it was that we know ended on one side of our brain. We know that this thing ended, that the old eon is gone, and that as that during that transition time, the powers of the world try and take everything they can from the old eon as though it still has value when it doesn't anymore. So it's like they're trying to gain power from something that's already lost its power. So it gets really deep. So it's this idea is that we have this evolutionary transition that's taking place that is the primary spiritual dimension of what's happening. And then in the world of form, as we're relating to the most topical level of it, we see this kind of like grasping for power that's really empty. Like it doesn't actually provide what it used to provide all through human history. So it's like no matter what, this transformation is taking place, but then on the superficial level, which has to do with mammon, it's all about money and trade, that everyone's basically like clinging to the old world and going crazier and crazier, trying to consolidate the power. And once they have it completely consolidated and they have that one world government, the whole thing flips on its head because it's of no value in the end. In other words, like if you have you can't have ultimately just like the smallest group controlling everybody, because the nature of the pyramid is that the power is actually in the base of the pyramid. It's not actually at the top, and it's an illusion to think otherwise. And we won't know that it's an illusion until we actually see it in its full expression, is the idea. So it's like, it's kind of hard to explain that, but it's that that small group of people doesn't actually have any power. Once the power is that consolidated, the whole thing turns on itself, because how can they control all the people? Like
I mean, kind of, but also something I talked to Richard Gage recently. He's like the head or the founder of the 9/11 Architects for Truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him this one question that's been plaguing me since forever about why make the Twin Towers and Building 7 fall in their own footprints? Because it was like leaving a big bloody handprint on a crime scene and leaving. Like, why leave this thing that's so obvious? Why
Right.
not have it just kind of like crack over sideways like a normal plane hitting? And the explanation was like threefold, but the thing that impressed me the most that I hadn't considered was that it had to fall into its own footprint because, and I'll paraphrase some of this, he didn't talk about how many people died, but in my mind, 3,000 people, tragedy, but nowhere close to just like a conflict that might happen in one day anywhere else in the world, right? So what is it about these 3,000 people? It's not really about the people. It's not even about the building and the tall building. It's about almost like rubbing your face in shit and then saying like, oh no, that's not shit. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
It's making you lie to yourself in such a huge way. And that's the real turning point. It wasn't the buildings falling. It wasn't the people dying. It was like, how far can we push you so that you won't even question it? And I can't remember if it was Colby or if it was one of the other CIA directors, but the quote is like, we will know when the CIA has done its job, when everybody is just believing pure propaganda and pure misinformation.
That's right.
And it's like a physical representation of that like huge milestone.
I want to see that conversation. That's totally the whole point of kind of where this ends up going. And I'm really like resonant with Judy Wood, like Dr. Judy Wood's idea of where do the towers go and the dustification idea, because they literally like disintegrated. And like you have those 10 survivors on the second story of Tower 2 that there's the Canadian documentary about, where they describe that these buildings collapsed on top of them, and yet after their collapse they see light coming in from above. So it really is a serious question of like, where the freak did the towers go? So I resonate with that completely. Like, that's the mind control element, that we're literally, it's an example of that Orwellian thing where we're being told 2 + 2 = 5 instead of 4, when we know what it is. And that's also like a lot of the things that we're seeing. Like, that's my feeling on like the trans stuff too, is it's like, or at least what like Dave Chappelle would have to say about it, where it's like, you know, his Andy Kaufman bit with Jim Carrey, where it's like, dude, you know, I know, and we know, but we have to treat it otherwise. That was an argument from Norman O'Brown in his book Life Against Death, of his criticism of the organized church's version of Christianity, was that to get people to accept something that they know is an impossibility, and as once they accept it, it means that it's no holds barred on everything else that follows. So if you wanted to use 9/11 as an excuse for all this other stuff, you need them to, like, there's a value in people accepting something that they're denying what their eyes are looking at. Like, they see something and they're in denial about it, which is literally what I'm describing about the Zohar. It says we know what we saw, but we can't come to terms with what we saw because there's this, you know, something in the way of that. So yeah, it's totally a deep point about us. And I'm of the firm belief that like that there's kind of a gauge for between 9/11 and 2020. For how much you seriously question in a fundamental way the official narratives of 9/11 really determined how you were going to react to the COVID-19 bullshit. Yeah,
that's super true. But I was going to think about like Sellicott, right? Sellicott, whatever the so a lot of people, you know, have this conspiracy theory that Jews missed September. They didn't go in to work on that day for September 11th. And this is true to some extent, but it's not because of the reason the Goyim think. So many non-Jews think that Jews just were getting calls on their pager, like, "Hey, don't like the Titanic with J.P. Morgan or something." But no, it just, as luck would have it, like, because Rosh Hashanah was on September 17th. Right. So a week before, you have the Sellikot kind of ritual fastings and preparing and things that you do. And so a lot of Jews were unable to make it an hour early to work because they were doing Sellikot rituals. And so I'd heard it one way versus a lot of other people heard another way. Some, you know, like I heard it from my mom too, because my mom had been in the University of Maimonides and knew a lot of rabbinical doctors, right, in New York. So when I heard this conspiracy theory from people on YouTube, you know, and like the loose change zeitgeist.
Leo Zagami said it too. He goes, a lot of Jews don't come to work that day.
Yeah, but you know the reason why. Like, okay, so the way I'd heard it was from my mom. Was like, isn't it amazing that Rosh Hashanah was right then? And so the week before that, there's so many people were doing the rituals of fasting, and so they were just lucky if you were religious enough. That God, you know, it's almost like, I mean, to me, I took it as a religious thing, as an actual, authentic, lucky religious thing, that this is going on right at the time when they're doing something else. So this group of people just happen to be lucky enough to not be at work because they're spiritual people or they're following the rules, at least. Because
what do you think of the dancing Israelis and that little short thing that Corbett did? James Corbett did the Dancing Israelis segment. Have you seen that? Are you familiar with those guys who were found celebrating, the Israelis who were celebrating on 9/11 with their van, and then the police got called on them and they got kind of taken in, and then they went on Israeli television afterwards and were kind of like insinuating in various ways that they had prior knowledge of what was going to happen, you know? There's that kind of stuff. So
I think that it's pretty common that a Jew might think that God helped them out. Like, well, how lucky are we? See? And this is the kind of thing, if I were a rabbi and I had kids, because you got to imagine, it's 2001. These kids could be watching, you know, The Matrix, or they could be playing video games. They could be doing a lot of other things in New York City than going to Rosh Hashanah Sellikot and preparing for worshiping God. So if I were a rabbi, I would be like, see, you know, God's blessed us. You have to be very lucky. You know, you're very lucky that you have this happening for you. I would ride that so hard, you know. It wouldn't mean that I actually had that background information, but maybe, you know, maybe
I'm a little disappointed to see the direction that Webster Tarpley's gone in more recent times, but he's been historically one of my favorite conspiracy theorists, especially when it comes to 9/11. So like, there's a great talk that he did, that's a debate with this guy who's just like anti-conspiracy theory, and then, you see his views of 9/11 and the intricacies of what he thinks. Like, so he just simply put, he would argue that 9/11 was a group effort between specifically rogue departments of intelligence agencies belonging to the U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabia, and that they worked together towards this end. And so his grounds for arguing that is like ridiculously strong. Like I find it almost impossible to argue against. And so, but I think the key thing here is when we say like rogue facets of these agencies, it's not that, oh, it was the CIA or whatever. It's like, no, you have like kind of these parts that kind of can act on their own together in a coordinated way.
This is a quote right out of the X-Files spinoff, where that's basically they're saying no, it's not the government and it's not the CIA, it's a small group of individuals that are in these places of power that are able to pull this off.
Yeah. And I can't help it. For so many years, that's the direction I go to, because I've seen the evidence for that. Right. I haven't seen the evidence that it's like these larger intelligence bodies like knowingly doing this stuff. Like I can't accept that, because it's like I'm
really glad you brought up the Lone Gunman, by the way. This is another example of one of those single season canceled in 2001 shows. Almost all my favorite shows were canceled, and some of the best of them were canceled in 2001. There's just this
Lone Gunman flew a little too close to the sun, I think.
Indeed it did.
And I this isn't a refutation, but I sent another link in the private chat for this. The source of that claim that all these Jews got advance notice and they didn't show up for work. Really, there was an instant messenger software that was kind of like ICQ or AOL. It was called Odigo or Odigo. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but it was essentially a New York/Israeli instant messenger service, and they're the ones that reportedly 2 hours before a plane hit, that they had sent out these messages to two individuals, and it didn't say that they were going to get hit by a plane or anything, but it was absolutely this is the source, and the origin of these claims are actually the vice president of the company at the time went on CNN and did an interview, and he's
not just a conspiracy theory, though. I was about to say, like, there was literally investigations into this. This was something that was to a pretty centric stage, right? There was like a commission to look into this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Odigo is interesting too. Do you remember? Because it had that very Windows XP like graphic user interface. I liked Odigo. That was
yeah. I mean,
is that what you're saying?
What now? No,
did you get it? Yeah. Okay.
Most people are probably aware that Tisha B'Av, which is the day of greatest mourning in Judaism and the Jewish faith, is communicative of the destruction of Solomon's temple. Which, what are the key archetypal elements of Solomon's temple includes the twin pillars, right? So and actually there's an argument too for the scale difference between the two towers, one to the other. This was something Scott Onstott discovered, is actually the exact ratio difference of the height of those two towers, because they're not exactly the same, happens to be the exact same height ratio difference between the pillars in traditionally in a Masonic lodge. So like Yakin and Boaz, the ratio from one to the other, according to Freemasons, happens to be the exact same ratio of one of the World Trade Center towers to the other. So like the chances of that happening are ridiculous. But Tisha B'Av, the day treated as the destruction of the temple in the Jewish calendar, is the 9th day of the 11th month. Tisha B'Av literally means 9/11. And so the argument that's given by Ramak in the 16th century regarding what's at least 12th century texts, if not earlier, in the Zohar, is that he's making the statement that what we see on this day in the future, that this is essentially Tisha B'Av for the world, that everyone gets to experience in coming out of this what the Jews experienced all these years ago, with every destruction of their temple, so that basically everyone gets kind of taken into the fold.
And remind people that Tisha B'Av is like a commemoration of like not just one, but pretty much every disaster they've ever had. It's like the feeding of when you eat your own babies level disasters,
Right. So the
Yeah.
date that it gives in the Zohar for the destruction of these strongholds in Rome, but understand Rome is everywhere that's not Israel, right? That's like the thing. So it's like the date that it gives appears totally random. And in the Hebrew calendar, it doesn't seem to be any symbolically significant date on its own that anyone can pinpoint. But it's described in the commentary that from the 16th century that this is 9/11 for the world, because it's Tisha B'Av for the world. So for it to happen to be on the Gregorian calendar, so if you translate that date and you ascribe it to, well, where would this appear in the Gregorian? The date that it gives is within a few days of September 11th, 2001. But in the 18th century, there's a rabbi who came along. I can find his name for you if I take a minute to. But he came along and he made the argument, and this is on record, that he goes, oh, it says that this happens in relation to Shabbat this many days. And he goes, Shabbat will never land on this date that it gives. Therefore, this is the date. And so in the 18th century, he says that the date translates to September 11th, 2001 in the Gregorian calendar. So that's the thing. So it gets confusing for people because when you dig into it and you look at the text itself, you're like, oh, well, this is a few days off. If you go by the most recent adjustment, which happens to be the 18th century, from an authority in the Jewish world, this is what it gives you. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
9 above every time, and there's a number of events that sync up with that. So it's like the 12 spies under Moses. I think there was a decent list for the Tisha B'Av. Let me go here. I saw it here a second ago. Or was it 5 calamities? 12 spies sent by Moses. The first temple built by Solomon destroyed. The second temple destroyed. The Romans crushing Bar Kokhba's revolt. And then following the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Roman commander Rufus. Now, but there's now many more examples, right? So you've got the expulsion from England on, Tisha B'Av, Ave 9, right? In 1290. And this continues on 1492. This was off 7, but I forget. I remember reading something that pushes the Jewish expulsion. Like it didn't happen until, Tisha B'Av. So
right.
The fact that this seems to be constantly the final solution, conversation happened in Tisha B'Av. The Buenos Aires bombing, right, where I met Niesman talking about the destruction, on the end of the 10th of Av, but something happened right before, like the celebration happened on Tisha B'Av. And similarly, the disengagement from Gaza. It's just on and on and on and on and on. And just, hey, don't shoot the synchronicity. That's kind of, don't shoot the message.
Right.
It's just a weird thing that happens, right?
Yeah.
I guess.
Also, and speaking of don't shoot the synchronicity, in a way, you mentioned that this great trauma where people are forced to eat their babies, and that becomes like this focal point milestone. But also, those events, just like 9/11, are used to introduce new sources of depravity and normalize them in context amongst other things. For example, I sent you another link for this thing called Here Be Cannibals. This is supposed to be based on a writing from 1201, and it's about the English famine during 1201. It was written by this guy, Abd al-Latif Baghdadi. And what he writes in this thing, if you search for the word detestable, it'll bring you right to this one specific passage. And ever since I read this thing, it absolutely blew my mind. But I'll paraphrase it instead of reading it off the screen. But what he's describing is that there was a famine. People were resorting to having to cannibalize each other. And it got so normalized that you could go into like a grocery store and they would have jars of human meat that you could eat because it was so widespread that it almost became, turned into a commodity. But he also talks in here on that line around the detestable stuff is that certain aspects of society, like elite groups, they use this as a way to start developing a taste for this particular type of meat, developing a taste for cannibalism, and that even when they no longer needed to, and the emphasis on the elite because they had resources to not result to cannibalism, they use this as a way of, well, if everyone else is being forced to
commercial for Pepsi is completely unrelated.
Now it's our chance to just go ahead and eat babies out in the open and not have to hide it because everyone else is doing it and using that as a cover.
It's kind of creepy how the new Pepsi logo on their website beats like a heart.
Oh yeah, that's a little creepy. But Thomas, are you familiar with Joseph Atwell's book Caesar's Messiah?
Tell me.
Heard of that? So Joseph Atwill made certain arguments. One is, so he was looking, he's not the only person to do this, and he says so. So like a lot of scholars have taken the works of Josephus Flavius and compared them to the gospel. So names reoccur in each. There's only so many names in the ancient world in Judea at that time, right? But one of the examples that he gives of parallels that exist between these Josephus Flavius books, War of the Jews and Antiquity of the Jews, and the gospel. So context being, Josephus Flavius was a Jew who was captured by the Romans. He was adopted into the Flavian court and essentially made into a Caesar himself. But he was one of the top, if not the top, Jewish scholar in Judea at 2,000 years ago. And
so one of the good ones is what you're saying.
So he wrote in these texts, a lot of them are kind of like propaganda for the Romans at the time, because he's literally writing them with the Romans. If he doesn't go along with what they're doing, he's going to get killed, right? So he's a compromised person. So there's an argument, an extremely strong argument, that him and likely a panel of intellectuals were responsible for giving us the gospel. That basically in the way that it's written, in the style of the Torah, but in Greek, and like this is not the language of lower class Judea, which would be Aramaic. This is the language of Rome, right? It's what the New Testament is written in. But anyway, one of the correspondence that Joseph Atwill picked up on, and he's not the first, was this story from Josephus where the Jews are hiding in the sewers, and the Roman soldiers smell the smell of burning flesh, and they go down into the sewers and they find that these parents have cooked their child. Okay, for whatever reason, it gives the child a name. That name happens to be Lazarus, right? So the parents, or the mother, or whatever, they offer the Roman soldiers half of the baby, which could be a reference to King Solomon suggesting cutting the baby in half or whatever. And it's just really like, and you're like describing how the soldiers were so disgusted that they would do this because they were starving in the sewers. Even them being in the sewers, like all of these aspects, like we don't have anything else to go on except for Josephus Flavius for a history of what happened 2,000 years ago in Judea. We have the text of a Roman botanist, and we have Josephus Flavius's text. That's it. Okay,
plus his
for
name
that
is
area.
Flavius, which sounds like flavor and gets us right back to the Pepsi challenge.
Totally. So, but the point is that it's interesting that his name is Lazarus, right? Because if you look at the wording in the Greek, in the gospel with Lazarus, he's risen from the dead, right? But she never says a word, and he's at the table afterwards. So it's like, and Lazarus was at the table too. So it's like, notice Jesus says, "Eat of my flesh and you live forever." So there's this weird thing. It's like Lazarus is resurrected in a sense, but are they just eating Lazarus? Is it some insane, like just extremely satirical joke that we would only get reading the gospel if we connected it to this other text that was probably, that. So if Josephus Flavius, we know, wrote this text of War of the Jews, where the story happens, that he names it that name. This would be one thing if we're just talking about one instance where the name parallels are just like really weird like this. There's example after example. There's a story in War of the Jews where these pigs are pushed into the Jordan and get murdered. Like all of these pigs, they get, oh no, excuse me, I'd strike that. It's the Jews get pushed into the Jordan in the same spot where the pigs get pushed into the Jordan in the gospel. So where you have Legion, where he says, "I'm Legion for I am many," or whatever, and he sends it into the pigs and sends them into the water. That's the same spot where the Romans push the Jews into the water and kill them. So and then the symbolism with the kosher thing with the pig thing is so messed up. But it seems as though, if you consider the context, this is a Jew who's in a very difficult spot. He's basically got a gun to his head. So it's like, what would you do? You have to go along with the Romans, but wouldn't you, like, if you were that intellectual, wouldn't you include indicators that speak to a deeper satire? Like, I think that that's what happened personally, having looked into this as much as I have. But I also think that Josephus Flavius did not predict what would have happened with Christianity, like into the future. Like, I don't think he ever could conceive of like what he was doing having that big of an impact. He thought he was just working for the Romans, helping to write this text as a war strategy and to get them to worship Caesar without them realizing realizing it, because every place that they would conquer, they would force the people there to worship Caesar, and they would. But the Jews were we don't know much about them. We only know that they likened them to goats because they were so stubborn. They would not submit. It was 100-year war, right? So how do you get them to do the thing? You do it subliminally. You take their religion and then you reword everything, and you get them to do the thing that you're trying to get them to do through a different means. So anyway, sorry for the rant.
No, I was going to say, because like it's funny because the Jews being pushed out of the empire into Greece in this Greco-Hellenistic, Judeo, eventually proto-Christian religion is up against in odds with the Bacchus Dionysian cult, which the Romans are far more into Dionysian Mithraism, and they're doing, what's that thing called again? Where they eat the flesh, omadios, right? Homophagia, or the eating of the flesh. And so this like raw flesh eating was something that maybe it's anti-Semitic, that they're thinking that they're cannibals, but also it's very anti-Hellenistic. They have an idea that the Greeks are inferior because why? They're stealing their culture and thinking they're secretly superior. And they're constantly contrived accusation is that they're cannibals that live off raw flesh, not just because they need to, but because, you know, the Greeks are just weird, right? That's the Romans are looking at it like this is their religion. But then what are the Romans doing to an extent also with the Mithra cult? So it seems to me there's something that always comes back to this idea of like eating of the flesh because they want to be gods, and the gods are treating humans like dehumanization for animals. How often does this happen outside of Greece? I've heard stories about the Japanese in World War II pickling Chinese. Not sure how true it is, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised what isn't propaganda these days.
It's a very common accusation of one's enemy.
The Russians, yeah, it is an extremely common accusation against one's enemy. Exactly. That's the thing that we see everywhere we go. But there is also stories of truth to it, like the Russians, right? You know, these posters put up that it is inhumane to eat your own children, right? The Soviets made posters like this, right? And the Germans made posters like that, targeted and aimed towards Soviets as well. So which is real? You know, which one's the true story? What do we do with it, right?
Well, speaking of what is real and what is true, what about Michael Rockefeller? Where do you guys add on this theory?
I mean, I'm sure he was gay, and so he loved to eat meat. You know, I think that was kind of the deal, is that he went down to the gay island. Everyone talks about how he went down to the cannibal island. No one tells you it's the gay island. But, you know, that's the anthropologically where men marry men island. And it seems like that was his real interest in that island. David, don't you I think David actually has opinion on this, right? You've talked about this before.
What that are we talking about him at Epstein's island? Is that what we're talking about? We're talking about another island.
Rockefeller is the one that went to Papua New Guinea, I believe, and was looking for artifact. He was going to spend his money, you know, traveling the world and doing that imperialist thing where you like take pictures of people's and put their stuff into a museum.
Yeah, no, I actually don't have a position on this one, honestly.
Well, the position to have is whether or not he was eaten by cannibals, because that's the main rumor, is that he disappears while he's in this tribe of known cannibals, and, you know, he was a Rockefeller, and maybe he rubbed them in the wrong way.
Oh, you're muted.
But not just cannibals, gays. This was like where homosexual what do you call that? It's a different word. Homoamorous relationships existed. And so he was studying anthropologically, an interest, it sounded like, in a civilization. I mean, he's from New York, right? So he's interested in a place where being gay was socially acceptable.
Well, I mean, if you look into the actual practice that they do, and the Wikipedia articles is pretty crazy, but it's basically Bach Saga. It's that when the young men in that tribe would come of age, they would go with the elders of that tribe into like a secluded area and basically ingest their power, so to speak. And that was the moment that they went from being like a kid into being a man. That was their adult.
What year was this? What time frame was this that
he died in 61, or he disappeared in 61.
Okay,
so
I don't know. Was he like the Princess Di of the Rockefellers? Was he like an exception where he wasn't like evil, so they like sent him out to be like, oh no, you go on this expedition, you know? It's like,
I mean,
I got a guy.
From all the pictures I've seen of him, he does have a very kind of like friendly not. I don't know what that means really, but he doesn't come
He
off
didn't look
as.
like Montgomery Burns, I guess is the
No,
way.
yeah. Well, maybe a young Montgomery
The
Burns.
Rothschild, but yeah, you know what I
This
mean.
is
But
I can see the bloodline. You know, I'm not saying he's like completely off of the Rockefeller centric, but the idea that he went into hiding even or disappeared or was finally killed because he had some I mean, but yeah, in general, it's completely plausible that he was that he saw more than he was supposed to see, and that he was trying to live in a post shame world. I mean, a lot of what they do is they shame you as a child so that you feel like you're different than the rest of them, and
Right.
you'll never be accepted by them. And
There's an interesting sync with this too, with Michael Rockefeller and cannibalism, because the Michael C. Rockefeller wing of, I believe, the Modern Museum of Art, I think it was, if it was MoMA, that this particular wing was run by the husband of Louise Bourgeois, who's the one that made that golden statue that looked like one of the Dahmer victims. I know that it wasn't necessarily based on Dahmer victims. It's this old medieval motif where someone would go into a seizure of some kind and they would seize up backwards. But that's been linked to this exact thing. And Tony Podesta had this picture. But I'm just saying, what are the chances, the synchronistic chances, that the Michael C. Rockefeller wing is basically run by the same lady that makes what was linked to Jeffrey Dahmer's victims into artwork?
Ooh, weird. So you're talking about that gold above his staircase where it's in
correct. I can't remember the name of it. It was called like the writhing or something. And it was based on old medieval artwork, but she ends up doing a series of those, and one of those gets encased in gold and sent to, I think it was Tony Podesta.
Right. So Podesta had that, and he also had those paintings that were really creepy with the children in the swimming pools with their hands clasped and things. And then the artist for that was from Tavistock. And even if you just went to their official website of that artist, it literally tells you, like, it's like any conspiracy theorist, it was like there was no room to speculate. They're literally like, we're talking about using trauma to repress altars, like to cover up altars that can be accessed for these different purposes. So it's literally just describing like this, like mind control, where they use trauma to develop different altars that then get covered up, that they can access at will through like code words or whatever. Like it's on the front, like the beginning of that artist's website. Like I haven't looked it up lately, but like when the whole Pizzagate thing was blowing up, like that week, I remember being like, huh, who did these paintings? Huh? Or do they have like a web page? I bet you this crap is still on there. I bet you they didn't even remove it because they're just so brazen, matter of fact about it. It's like, no, they were a trauma victim who the artist experienced these terrible things, and now she's processing that through her artwork, and that's why she's painted these children in swimming pools naked and whatever. Yeah, so weird. And then you look at, and that was like a magazine, wasn't it? Like it wasn't like Better Homes and Gardens, but it was like something like that. Whereas like Podesta was like showing off his home, and like it shows you his bedroom, and he's got these stuffed animals on the bed, but he doesn't have any kids, and it's just like, why is he showing us this? Like, it's just like, and like just wanting to show off, like, is secrets in plain sight again, or what?
The same reason why was he collecting these paintings? Because when I was looking into that too, it's not as if this particular artist was being commissioned to make this stuff for the art world. This was, right, like you mentioned, her way of processing some really insane trauma that she went through. So now it almost feels like there is a rubbing salt in the wound, or almost making fun of her by collecting her artwork and putting it up on your walls. Now you're turning her trauma into your entertainment and almost like trophies.
What an insane picture we're looking at right now.
Right, and look how stoked. I mean, he just looks stoked too. He
like,
loves it there.
Like I'm putting some mustard on that for sure.
They're thinking that about him. They're gonna put some mustard on him, or is he
allegedly, right? Like, there's no full evidence that he was cannibalized, but there were like Dutch ministers who really pushed the narrative, which is why I didn't believe it to begin with, because it seems like, okay, well, now you got witnesses you don't really have who are trying to say this is an open and shut case. This came up recently because of the Otanya people, and that's why I saw a documentary on this at some point. I think it's called not the search for Michael Rockefeller. Keep the River on Your Right, a modern cannibal tale, and this was from 2000, and it's a very interesting documentary by Lori Gwen Shapiro. I don't really know which Shapiro that is, but you wouldn't be surprised. And they talked about all of the different tribes and the personal interpretation, and there were definitely some anthropological interesting things about the tribe. But generally, most of the cannibalism done isn't like, certain Native American tribes would eat an eagle to get their eyes or eat their enemies to get their power. This isn't the way Papua New Guinea seems to work. It's more of a eye for an eye kind of thing, So something would have had to have happened that he would have been blamed for, that they felt like, and he must have, I don't think, unless he was a cannibal himself, which there's not evidence necessarily outside of him being a Rockefeller, that's not really, it's pretty circumstantial.
Well, the Rockefellers aren't the Rothschilds, isn't that the idea? So wasn't there a weird thing
Unless
that happened to the Rothschilds recently where they didn't find his body, but they immediately said he died in a fire? Wasn't that a Rothschild?
Yeah, there was
in the last year or something?
Oh, no. Wait, was that Rothschild? That was Rothschild Los Angeles fire. Was it Rothschild or Rockefeller? I thought that was another Rockefeller that died in the fire.
Oh, was it?
I'm gonna look it up.
We're gonna have a band Rockefeller pretty soon.
Topanga Canyon kills Rothschild, or was it Rockefeller? Let's see here. A man, William de Rothschild. Yeah, William de Rothschild, November 27th, 2024. So William de Rothschild died in some sort of a,
Did he though? Fire. That was the thing. It was like they didn't find remains. I thought it was just like they were like decided he was there or whatever. I can't remember.
Yeah. Well, they say member of prominent Rothschild family found dead after Laurel Canyon house fire. Neighbors say. So I don't know. Fire was put out by 45 firefighters. 45.
It's the gematria of a dom, but whatever.
Yeah. Sorry, can't help myself. The Rothschilds. I don't see anything that says they found his body or not. Or
this was there was speaking about finding the body, just for the Rockefeller one. The book was called Savage Harvest, I think, and you were talking about these Dutch guys, but really it was government documentation from the Dutch government that had been suppressed that seemed to allude to that he was taken out. And the reason that the Dutch suppressed it is because they were at risk, I think, of losing control of Papua New Guinea to Indonesia. And this would have been like a huge turning point. This would have been something showing that they already didn't necessarily have control. So why not just secede interest in Papua New Guinea?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if if it had these kind of deeper motives or whatever, but that also once again makes me question why he's there in the first place. It was really just his personal interest or a directed interest of like an encouragement, like go check that out, look into that, but also just the interest of like mega rich people like that who are basically like their own kind of like royalty in a sense, having an interest in anthropology, like the Golden Bough stuff that we've been looking at. Like I can't help but feel like what was his fixation with all of that?
My mind always goes to Tarzan, because the whole entire premise of Tarzan is that this British blood means that you were inherently superior, and that the whole entire idea of Tarzan is that you could pluck somebody out of British aristocracy and put them anywhere in the world. Let's just put them in the middle of a freaking rainforest, and they will be king of the jungle.
Mowgli.
That there's nothing that you can do to prevent the British bloodline from becoming superior. It is just inherently superior. And so when you say, what was Michael C. Rockefeller doing in Papua New Guinea? It was just that colonial and like imperialist bloodline thinking, everywhere I go, I am superior, and here I am spreading my superiority across the world.
Yeah, it's crazy how they woke every single movie but Tarzan. Like that's the one they won't just replace with like a black woman. Tarzan should be a black
Jungle Book.
Jungle Book was pretty good though. I'm alright.
Jungle Book was pretty good. Especially Christopher Walken's character. But whatever. No, I'm thinking of Apocalypse Now, because like Apocalypse Now was like he's I guess he was American, right? Colonel Kurtz, right? But from Heart of Darkness, still same rules apply. But like that whole ending of Apocalypse Now is totally taken directly from the Golden Bough, which we've discussed. Like the Golden Bough, the book is seen in the ending of Apocalypse Now. Like it's on Colonel Kurtz's table, you know, along with From Ritual to Romance as well. But this idea of like, you know, that was when they're telling what's his name, Martin Sheen, to go out there with what his mission is. They're like, he's gone crazy. You can think you become as God or whatever, but he's like, he's now the white man who thinks he's the king of these people. And you know, so he's being there. It's the ritualistic killing of the king is like central to what Apocalypse Now is communicating. But
also, the man who would be king, is that the name of it with Sean Connery?
super Masonic, dude. I watched that a while ago. I was like, oh my god, they went there. Sean Connery.
That was the whole premise of the movie, was that he was a Freemason.
Totally.
Or he wasn't even the Mason, was he? He got the
He had the Mason, he had the necklace. Did he? I thought the necklace was his necklace.
Okay, maybe
he had to have the necklace, but he had to be a Freemason for it to work, because that's what. Nice shirt, by the way. Wait, let's get a little zoom in on that one. Go up a bit. Oh, I love it. That's adorable. Yeah. So I feel like they made the point that he was inevitably going to be the king because he was a Freemason in a world without Freemasons. But also also a cargo cult has been installed, because they see the symbol that they're familiar with. These lords of this witch doctor or whatever sees his necklace as a Freemason symbol, and they're like, "Wow, the Knights Templar were here and left their gold for when you come back." You know,
it's not square and compass. It's literally your shirt, isn't it? I can't remember what the actual.
I believe it was the Freemason sign.
Oh, was it just the square and compass?
Would be king necklace. Let me see if I can remember. I remember it being a Freemason sign.
The symbolism is like all over the film, though. It's not just a freaking necklace, although that's central to it. It's like Desperately Seeking Susan with the jacket.
Oh,
you know?
It's both. That's why. Like, here's the necklace.
The I and the thing. Yeah, there you
I
go.
instead of a G. But you know what? It's like the same as the Indiana Jones, like an I, right? Indiana Jones Disneyland ride. Google, go to it. Where is it at? I'm having a problem using Bing. It's like it's trying to force me to use.
I mean, and if you want to go even farther back than Knights Templar and Masonry, that square and compass symbol without the G,
the Temple of the Forbidden Eye,
geometry, right?
What's that?
Sorry.
Like the square and compass would still represent an older, even older than Knights Templar, an older culture that was aware of like Euclidean geometry, of being able to create all of reality with just these two tools.
I don't think so. It looks like it's a cargo cult. Look, the Freemasons and the Knights Templar have been in India at some point 1,000 years ago. Maybe like at that, it's the idea like they're crossing back from through the Middle East or something happened.
The specific symbolism of it, not just the geometry. Like if you're talking about that, you have the 6-point star hexagram. That's one thing, but the square and compass specifically, as far as I can tell, is a European occultist take on the Kabbalistic, the top 3 of the terrestrial Sephiroth converging with the top 3 of the supernal Sephiroth. So you have the compass itself is Keter, Chochmah, and Bina, and the square is Gevurah, Tiferet, and Chesed. And then it's heaven and earth converging, and the G is Gimel, because the G is the vertical pathway that connects Keter to Tiferet. So I'm personally convinced that that's the symbolism, and it has profound significance. But if you're just talking about the geometry itself of the hexagram, that is across all cultures.
Specifically the square and the compass combined. If anything, it was co-opted by Freemasons. They didn't come up with that symbol because that symbol represented the way that you could plot all of physical reality with these two tools. Using just the square edge and using just the compass, you could make circles and lines and angles.
But that's what's part of the Man Who Would Be King's point, and it's that Freemasons believe that they didn't just start this organization recently. They have this, justification.
You'll see that if you go to the Masonic headquarters and look at the paintings on the wall going back to Egypt. Yeah,
their inference is that they all, this is some ancient truth, this objectively true, thing that they've been latched onto, and maybe this is the most recent incarnation of this primordial truth, but that is essentially the Knights Templar Solomonic. It's Solomon's magic, right? That's been latched onto, right? I'm
Well,
just gonna
yeah,
do it for you.
it's a Euro take on a traditional Kabbalistic communication. That's as far as I can tell. When we're saying specifically the G Gimel with the square and the compass, I don't know. I mean, if you're talking the geometry of it, that's deeper. But I'm not even saying. I actually agree with you, Thomas, in that I'm not saying it necessarily has to be the Freemasons, but I am going to argue that it was European occultists. You know, that could go back further than specifically, you know, what we call the Freemasons. But
well, Euclid, not necessarily European. I guess, I mean, stretching the definition European, if it also applies
Western.
to like,
It didn't come. I don't think it came from India, and I don't think it came from Egypt. The
I can
square,
see that,
and the compass.
Western.
The hexagram is on every continent, everywhere, or not just every continent, it's all over the world. You know. And communicating the same thing of the merging of heaven and earth, which is all I'm talking about with, you know, what was communicated Kabbalistically is still that same premise. But yeah, what's Euclid states? Good question.
What's the question exactly?
I'm not sure I understand the question. What's Euclid states?
When Euclid was around? Is that what you're trying to say?
When Euclid was around, the exact years. I don't know the exact years.
Oh, okay.
325 BC.
There you go.
So I guess that predates when someone says Europe. I guess I don't think BC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just saying Western civilization. You know, but yeah.
You saw Jack Dorsey got suspended from Twitter?
Yeah.
I still don't know what he said. I'm really curious.
That's a good question. I don't know either. I just thought right before I came on the show, actually, I got a little blurb. I was like, oh, the news now. What is happening? He got a little too big for his britches.
I mean, a lot of data has been coming out that's like changing the way things, what we're allowed to say or not say. I mean, I know Germany, finally the Federal Intelligence Service report came out that the corona's origins were almost certainly from a lab leak, right? Which is what, you know, Trump has said and the American government has said, but Germany knew this years ago and just didn't want to publish the document, right? So this has kind of come out.
Oh yeah. Dude, everyone needs to look at everyone who's resistant to these ideas need to look at the House subcommittee report on COVID response, because this is all laid out now. And I'm amazed that like you will not see this on the news apparently, but like this House subcommittee select committee was both parties. Like this was a bipartisan scientific endeavor to look to, and the part of their findings was that they leaned way in that direction, which also reflects what the CIA is saying and all of this. But you know, for a House subcommittee report that has these findings about COVID response, for it to get no mention from mainstream media, to the point that, you know, people are still going about their business like we're still think what we thought in 2020, 2021, is pretty absurd. So yeah.
Well, politically, what is there to gain from drudging this up? It's again, you link this to 9/11. I think what would be the political incentive to actually want to bring this up and look into it and start pushing people out? The only thing that makes sense to me, and I've got a small mind, is that if you're trying to stomp out the old legacies, if you're trying to absolutely treat the Bush family like they were Carthage and make sure that they never can reemerge on the scene again, this would be one of the very few things that you would do for political incentive. Otherwise, all you're going to do is offend people, get ostracized yourself, and spend lots of resources proving this thing that was kind of for 10 years was sort of put to bed.
Oh, you're talking about...
I'm talking about both 9/11 and now COVID for the exact same reason.
Right. It's the same thing. We have these committees that are doing these investigations. They're putting out the data, and people are not able to process it because they already learned the lie. Why learn the truth?
Learn and then have to relearn. There would be contempt for the person forcing us to do this unlearning and relearning. Even if they're telling us the truth, it would just breed contempt. And I'm from a very pragmatic sense. If you're a politician, you know how political capital works. What would be the incentive to go into this hard and versus just focus on any other pet project you got?
It depends on the politician, and it depends on their prerogative, and it depends what's held over them. You know, that's what I'm interested with the Epstein stuff. I don't just need to know who the perverts are. I want to know who the compromised people are, not just that they're compromised, but specifically what they were compromised with, to say and to do. So, like, you know, that's.
But we're not
the bigger
seeing. I mean,
issue.
we just talked about this in the last show. Like the Epstein papers. Like, who amongst you really thought we were going to get a list of names that we hadn't gotten before? Like, what did you
A
expect
list
to
of
happen?
names. I don't give a fuck. Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah, but
no.
what I just mean, like, realistically, like, I don't think that I didn't expect, and I still don't expect that at this point, it's pretty obvious that anything we're going to get is just kind of to shut us up because they've already done what they're going to do privately, and they don't really care about the bickering masses,
You know,
not necessarily.
I could be totally off base, but I think I may have influenced something a bit on
Go
Twitter.
on.
Because Anna Luna, the woman who we were looking at, who was put in charge, right, of all this stuff. So you have that other lady. God, I can't think. What's her name? The
Bondi?
Bondi. So Bondi, she says, I've got it on my desk. You know, I got the list on my desk, whatever. Oh, I'm looking at, you know, she said that on like Fox News or whatever, and on Twitter, and then she erased it on Twitter. But then that other lady, she said, you know, that she treated it that she was in charge. Like, we played a clip on Synctank, like the way she was speaking to it, and she did a tweet, and I got to it pretty early, and I felt like, because there's one position that she was taking, and then like it really quickly changed, like she did a total 180, and I wasn't seeing like because I saw all these people responding to her, like saying, just release the files already, just release the files, we're all adults, we can handle it. It's like, if you looked at the responses to her tweets, that's almost all it was, exclusively. But I was thinking, I don't know if you guys are hip to this, but I was thinking of Oh Lucky Man, the way that there's a scene, there's a segment of that movie where he's like basically being used by these like super rich people who want to do some kind of Zyklon B type napalm shit or something in the world. Like, they're just doing really shady stuff, and they use Malcolm McDowell's character as just like a fall guy, so like they can hand him the briefcase should they get caught, and just be like, oh, I don't know who this guy is, do you know who this guy is, or whatever, you know, he's the one in charge. And so anyway, I didn't reference this directly to her by name, but I was like, you need to let people know that you're not actually, that you're nothing, apparently nothing more than a spokesperson, because it looks like I don't remember my exact wording, but I was like, it looks like you've been put in a position to be a fall person, so that people have a person to blame when this stuff doesn't actually come out. And I was like, and it was like right after that, she like tweeted like a complete reversal of everything she'd been tweeting before. And so like, I don't know for sure if I influence that, but I have to say, the way Twitter works is I don't completely rule it out, because I was just like, heads up, people have gotten the wrong impression about what your role is. It looks like you're being taken advantage of, you know? And so ever since then, she hasn't taken the same position. She's like, I'm not getting, it was right after that. She goes, they're not answering my phone calls. Like, I'm trying to get through. She's like, can Twitter help? Like, she's just like, now she's helpless, when before she was in charge, you know? So it's like, you give them the in charge role, and they're like, they get a big head, and then all of a sudden they're like, wait, this is all on me? Because she would love to be in charge if the thing came out. And now that lady Bondi, she says she's got a truckload right now. I mean, it's been what, a week and a half? I thought that the deadline was the 9th of this month, by the way, if they're going to actually release that stuff that they said, that of what the executive order actually was. So I don't even know if we haven't gotten it now. I'm like, is this even going to ever happen? And they're just hoping the public forgets again.
I think it's real. I truly think that this is an auction, and every time they say that we're going to release the black book, that's their way of saying, hey, we just got a new highest bidder. So if you know the number to call to put your bid in, the clock is ticking.
Right. I feel like what's happening is that one by one, people are actually getting something from the FBI, and as soon as they see it, they're like, no way, no way. And no one wants to be responsible for it too, because it's probably, the implications have to do with blackmail and the specific things that people have been blackmailed for, and what a giant bombshell that would be on the public. Like, we'll never trust the government ever again with anything like that.
Well, like, what kind of crazy person was ever going to trust the government ever again with anything? That's the,
I don't know. You go on Twitter and you see what a lot of people have to say. It's shocking, the amount of what people actually think. And go on Facebook, it's even worse, you know, on a local level.
Yeah.
you know. So like
extremely.
there's still a lot of like trust. Like it's people like us, we never, I haven't trusted the government since long before 9/11, you know what I mean? Like that's why on the day of 9/11 I was like, yeah, give me a break. But like in everything that followed, I'm like, you know.
That's
but like not everybody's
definition of
like that,
government,
man.
that which cannot be trusted, you know, pretty
Yeah.
much as I was taught by my daddy. So I just wanted to point this out for Alex. Alex, cryptocriptology couldn't be here tonight, but he did send a link over here because we talked about Gene Hackman and the hacking the man's genes, and he has his, you know, quantum midpoint on his map, his quantum midpoint synchronicity map, and he said 666 weeks before the dual deaths of Jim Henson and Sammy Davis Jr. is 237 weeks after the death of Aristotle Onassis, right? And so this is the Gene
there's
Hackman's
that warning
midpoint.
letter from John F. Kennedy to about like there's there's a letter from him that's apparently totally authentic where he's warning about keeping Jackie away from him. I've talked about it before, but yeah, that's crazy guy. Yeah.
I mean, it seems pretty interesting, actually, in terms of things. So
I share a birthday with Sammy Davis Jr., but not the same year, obviously.
I was just thinking the Candyman cover he did. It was stuck in my head yesterday. I don't know if you guys care about Tutuerde, but just like moment of prayer for my boy. You know, I thought I liked him a lot, and like so, God, he's being sent to the Hague to do ICC courts for, you know. He was basically like taking out anybody involved, the CIA in war against drugs for a long time in the Philippines. How about George Lucas's 60 scripts for Star Wars? Did you see this? That he wrote $40 million episodes, 60 episodes of what Star Wars could have been. I don't know. How do you feel about the destruction of all of the media that we love? Pandering, the Panderverse, Kathleen Kennedy. I don't know. I've just been kind of angry at Kathleen Kennedy. This isn't really a sync thing, but I just wanted to say that. Where are we at with like?
It could be a sync thing. I mean, we could easily go there.
Elaborate.
Well, just the nature of like, you know, there's that old Wired magazine where half of it was George Lucas's face was Darth Vader and half was George Lucas, and he made the argument in that interview that if he was to identify with any character in Star Wars, it would be Darth Vader. And then we've discussed this before, the chest plate with the Hebrew on it, if you look closely enough, and it reads in Hebrew, by his merits he will be judged. And like this whole idea that it all kind of comes down to him, and like she's been like his if he's the you know, like the masculine side of like Da'at, then like she's like, you know, Kathleen Kennedy's like his female equivalent. And this idea of like, why is he Darth Vader? Like he's like if the corporate side of it is like a boat, it's like he's more machine now than man. It's all about the toys. It's all about the product. It's not about the spirit of the thing, which was really, if you read his book, his original book, Star Wars, like it speaks so much to like revolution of like coming out of the 60s and like this kind of like this idealism stuff. And then if you combine that with THX 1138 as a movie, not, you know, about the future, but from the future, and how Star Wars is like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But when we see stars, we're seeing a long time ago in the present. So it's just like, I don't know. I like you could easily go there with like what she represents in the same way that he represents Darth Vader. It's like she also has this kind of like Clephotic takeover. She's more machine now than woman kind of thing going on. So I could see that relating to it in a synchronistic way.
And Epstein, right? I think like Chris Terrace just brought this up. Epstein called George Lucas untouchable. And there's a bunch of talk about Epstein having Lucas on his island. Evidence given by Epstein victim Joanna Schielberg involved questioning whether she'd met George Lucas on Epstein's island. She stated she hadn't met Lucas and that he, you know, essentially to Epstein, George Lucas was untouchable and never wanted to go and never went. Which is kind of interesting. Granted, he has like a cool wife, so maybe he just doesn't even need cool wife, cool life. You know, happy wife, happy life.
I've always questioned that idea that the only reason why he didn't do anything other than Young Indiana Jones adventures directing wise following Star Wars was just his heart condition issue that he happened to have during A New Hope. I've always kind of questioned that, but it could be as simple as that. It also just feels to me like came up against something that he was like with fame, and he was just like, I actually don't want any part of this. He almost kind of reminds me of Kubrick in that way, where he kind of like had this treatment of like Hollywood, that's Sin City, you know, like he like wanted to separate himself from something, you know. But at the same time, I think he really did authentically entertain himself as this kind of like Darth Vader character, that this was an inevitability that would come with like fame and success. And like it's like actually like integrated into the story itself in this really direct way.
Post Taco, I just want to correct you here. You're talking about his lame wife, Marcia Griffin, who nobody likes, and I don't even care that she exists. But his cool wife is Melody Hobson. Melody Hobson, who worked with both Wikipedia and with what's it called again? They had some cool group together. It's like a educational group, right? What's it called again? They have something they do together that's important. It's like some sort of a Wikipedia like thing for education. And you know, this was a big thing, was George Lucas allegedly thought that 2012 was going to be the end of the Mormon. I'm sorry. Wow. My Freudian slips today. The Mayan calendar. The Mormon calendar. Yes. No, the Mayan calendar. Until $4.62 billion later, investing in Malaysian NGOs and to build up a nature preserve and to kind of shift reality into a version of reality where the universe doesn't end. A big part of that is his marriage to Melody Hobson. She just seems like a pretty cool lady.
She's also in the Rockefeller Foundation Board of Trustees.
Yeah. She's also involved with a couple other cool things too. What was it? Starbucks, DreamWorks, 100 Forbes 94, not 93. For Forbes' most powerful women, but there's a zero in there, and you can imagine. Pretty clear. She was involved with J.P. Morgan Chase. Yeah, in general, I always thought that Melody seemed like a pretty cool lady, and I can totally see why he married her. And they're still together. As far as I know, everything's going just fine with them. Yeah, in the television drama, The Good Wife, there's literally a show about her. There's a show about her called The Good Wife, right? Actress Vanessa Williams played her character in the show.
Andreas Thomas, did I go off to you guys, or was I doing it elsewhere? About recently, I recently downloaded all the Star Wars films, the 9 plus the 2, and as that's the official number as it stands. Like that's subject to change. But we have, at this point, we have George Lucas's original vision come to completion, relatively his original vision. But as far as the numbers go, the way he envisioned to go from this trilogy to that trilogy to that trilogy, there's 9 films, right? And then you have the 2 extra films that are a Star Wars story.
And the holiday special.
The holiday special.
And let's not forget the Hobbit, or another slip, the Ewok movies, which are so good.
There's the Ewok movies. That's true. But like as far as like Star Wars movies go, you have so that's important.
I would take the Ewok movies over 7, 8, 9 any day. But keep
also
going.
Cannibals.
Yeah, but those also, keep in mind, those are made for TV movies. I'm saying like full on theatrical release Star Wars film. This is gonna go somewhere. I'm saying you got a Star Wars story, which is Solo, and then you have Rogue One. Well, Rogue One implies 1, obviously. Rogue One. Solo is 1. It's Solo. It's 1. So you have the 2 Star Wars stories are 1 and 1 implied in the names, plus the 9. So it's literally 11 films with 9 plus 1. I've never heard anyone mention it. Also, the fact that we know a Phantom Menace coming out in 1999. Bookends 9/11 with Attack of the Clones, you know, like a Phantom Menace is about false flag terrorism, but people don't address it necessarily because they're distracted by Jar Jar Binks and shit. So I'm just saying, like it's a Phantom Menace. Who's doing these terror attacks? And then you're like, oh, Darth Maul, and everyone looks at Darth Maul. He looks kind of like a demon. They're like, okay, he's a Sith. Okay, it's like, but people are distracted by the fact that he's working for the government. He's with Palpatine. So it's like, it's about false flag terrorism. Make no mistake about it. That's why it's called the Phantom Menace. And then you have where does it end up going? This is how liberty dies, with standing applause. Like Natalie Portman,
the progressive liberal, foolish progressive liberal Jar Jar Binks actually gets everyone to sacrifice their freedoms and safeties in the Congress, joint session of Congress.
That is right.
Revenge of the Sith has that plot line of Order 66, which is literally a fault, like you're talking about it. That is the false flag attack in order to pass the Patriot Act.
That's the Patriot Act. So it's all there. I would say of any films that were ever made, that those Star Wars prequels encode everything that happened with 9/11 and what followed 9/11 closer than any other sets of films. And yet we don't acknowledge it because of Jar Jar Binks and shit. Just saying.
I do. I mean, my question's always not been that. It's more, is Jar Jar Binks aware of, and this is a good question about the Democrats as well, but like, is Jar Jar Binks aware of how much destruction he's doing? Because people say Jar Jar Binks is evil and that he's really a Sith Lord, which is a pretty great way to look at it, that he's secretly doing unconscious effort the destruction and demise of your own freedoms through the sacrificing of your freedoms for the sake of the greater empire. But I think it's just as good that he's ignorant, because if he's someone who's thinking he's helping make the world of Misa propose, dude, you know, this is exactly, I know way more people like
talking about Kathleen Kennedy. Like, he is the future. He's the first inkling that we have in 1999 of like the woke insanity, everything, like the symbolism of Jar Jar Binks, because he's a stereotype. He's a Jamaican stereotype. And then people reacting to Jar Jar, they're so distracted by their reaction to the stereotype that they're not seeing that they're watching a movie that's literally telling you everything that's about to happen. And as it happens, like when the next two come out of what was taking place, like in the world, like with the United States, it's insane.
I don't know if you guys ever heard of Gray's Law, and I can't remember what the inversion is. It's on I think it's about like Hanlon's razor, which is never assign malice, which could be attributed to incompetence. But Gray's Law does the inversion of this, and this is where Jar Jar Binks comes in, because Gray's Law is essentially like like one of Arthur C. Clarke's laws, which is any sufficiently advanced incompetence is indistinguishable from malice, meaning that it doesn't matter what you think the intent is. If the end result, then you might as well just assume that it was through malice and not incompetence.
I think the difference is like how much it's like the sorry, you go first. I'll get to
I want to say it's like Monsters Inc. Yeah, the lab leak. What you just said applies to what you were saying earlier about the lab leak. I'm sorry, Andreas. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, with Monsters Inc. Because sometimes the fuel is more powerful if it's not self-aware. So people that are trying to get something done, that's harder to get done. Whereas people doing something without meaning to, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's so much easier to imagine that more and more people trying to do the right thing will do something wrong, because that's what happens, versus someone who's so evil, but also they're effective. You know, it's not every day that you find a villain that exists in this world that are as effective as they are evil. It's far more likely to find a bunch of ineffective people that do the opposite of what they want to do. And that's what we see every day. People saying, oh, well, I mean for this to happen, but that leads to the opposite. It just seems that's more prevalent in our world.
Yeah.
All I can think of now, do you think that the Death Star, someone painted nanothermite on the inside? Like, was even the Death Star an inside job?
That's been a joke.
That's
since
literally
early, like that's like ever since Loose Change came out, that's been the joke of like the stormtroopers arguing amongst each other whether the destruction of the Death Star was an inside job. Somebody asked in the comments here, they said, or they made a comment about, I think they misinterpreted what I was saying is Jar Jar woke? No, I'm not saying that Jar Jar is woke. I'm saying that the people watching Star Wars, that initial reaction to Jar Jar of what he is as that stereotype that he is the first like inkling that we have of the turn of the century of like what would come of our over-the-top distraction that comes with the woke thing. If you're treating it like Ship of Fools, you know, who is the guy, the Unabomber, he had that book version that was Ship of Fools applied to today, where everyone's on the boat and they keep arguing about this shit that just doesn't have any significance or meaning. They need to turn the ship, they need to change the course of the ship, but they're not going to because they're arguing about everyone's bullshit. So like I'm saying that like Jar Jar is like that. He's a distraction from what's right in front of you. I'm not saying that Jar Jar is woke. I'm saying that the woke mob mindset is implicit in of how Jar Jar was reacted against.
And I am saying the real Sith. I'll just say it. But I mean, I always said put grass on the Death Star, right? Like that's really what I mean. If you go to Xirtus, even before I was doing YouTube, I was like, go to Xirtus.com, and if you donate, you can put grass on the Death Star. because that's exactly what we were living in this world that's doing, is this idea that we can't really solve the problem. We can't really remove the threat, but maybe what we can do is we can make it look a little bit better. We can, give social, signaling that we're doing the right thing because we're putting grass on the Death Star. But that is always, is the Death Star designed to explode to begin with? Well, how much of a benefit is there to that? And I think that's the utilitarian outweigh. There always is a benefit to the destruction of something, because then it's like in Fifth Element. You shatter a glass, look at all the little robots that have jobs all of a sudden.
Well, I would almost equate it more to silent running. Wasn't that sort of trying to put grass on the Death Star?
Oh, interesting.
There, sort of. Silent running is like the short-sightedness of, we need Earth for cities. We don't have room for forests. We don't completely understand the value of forests, but we've been genetically taught. We have this heritage of belief from our grandparents, and maybe that's the segue, is that in the youth, they don't have the thing. They don't even remember the value. Your grandparents who ran through the forest, they're the ones voting to somehow preserve this forest, but they're too old to even experience it anymore. So we'll put it in space, and within one generation, they're all dead. So then we have this expense that we don't appreciate. So by getting rid of these forests, we're just going to blast them off into space and forget about them. We can finally move on. It's a gradual ignorance that develops with a lack of empathy.
It was also sort of a precursor to Idiocracy, because the funny part in Idiocracy is when they're saying just drink water, put the water on the plants, like the water that comes from the toilet. Because there's a line in Silent Running where he's trying to tell him, like, this is real food. This is like an actual fruit and vegetables that I grew myself. Why would you want to eat these weird little space pellets that are just like compressed, minerals and calories versus this? And everyone looks at him and it's like, yeah, because I want to eat something that came out of dirt.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's been coming up a lot, though, man, is a thing with Idiocracy. Because, I mean, people are like, oh, they can make comparisons of, oh, everyone's stupid or whatever. But with Idiocracy, it's like that lag time that it takes for the plants to grow, to sprout. And the way that everyone's in a frenzy freaking out about, oh, it didn't work. See? And it's like, dude, that's not how these things work. Like, and it's even funny because like Obama used to say, I think it's from a Winston Churchill quote that Leonard Cohen did in a song where he says, "O mighty ship of state, sail on, O mighty ship of state," where he equated a government, administration to like the government's like a big ocean liner, and we're steering that ocean liner. So you go to make a turn, you go to make a shift of direction, which kind of ties back to Ship of Fools. But he's like, it takes a while for the effects of this thing to really like move. And then you see the way that people react to things when you have a new administration, where it's all based on their own confirmation bias or their own whatever it is that they prefer to emphasize, of like, oh, look at how bad they're doing or look at how good they're doing. It's all depending on whatever their own bias is, But I guess I'm just pointing out that speaking to what you're saying, it's like there's a lag time, right? So it's like with the seed, it's like you have to until you see that sprout, but you can't react so insanely to not seeing the effects of something when you don't really know what it's gonna take or what time. You have to give it some time. But yeah.
Well, everybody should go to paranoidamerican.com and buy some comic books. There's a bunch of things. Are they still on sale? Did you guys miss the sale? You guys screwed up.
The sale's over, although there'll be a new one on Monday because I'm going to be doing a 6-hour live stream for my 100th episode. You guys are both invited, of course, to pop in whenever you want. I'll be doing giveaways. I'll have some sales going on at that time, too. I also just did 2 shows in the last 10 days on my Sound Science series, which is only on Rumble. We started on YouTube and then we transfer over to Rumble because we play full-ass music videos. We don't want to get them taken down. We did one with Weston Cage, and we listened to Enigma and Enya and a whole bunch of things from like started soundtrack. And then just earlier today, we did one with Shane Cashman that was all about antagonistic music. Both of those are really good. If you like talking music and just going back and listening to stuff that you've never heard of or haven't listened to over a decade, both of those shows were really phenomenal.
That's cool. I haven't talked to Shane in a while. We should get involved with him again sometime. Good guy.
Thomas,
love him.
I have a question for you. One of your books is like a Magic School Bus book about conspiracy theory stuff, right? Don't you have that?
Yeah. Connect the dots, the confounding conspiracy of chemtrails.
Right, I kind of want to see that one because oh, there you go, chemtrails. Okay, because I was happened to be watching Robot Chicken the other night, and like they have like a parody of Magic School Bus, and I was like, doesn't Thomas have a book on that? I couldn't remember. There it is.
It's amazing.
I haven't read it, but...
Read it to every kid that you ever meet. You know,
I've got all the original Magic School Bus books signed by the illustrator that say like to Tommy and everything on them because when I grew up, I think he taught in the same area that my mom was teaching in upstate New York. So, I mean, I've got Magic School Bus running through my veins.
Wow. That's awesome.
Well, all right. And then MK Ultrasound. You got to go check out MK Ultrasound 723 to see all of David's research. Click on highlights here. You can watch the media presentations. We just talked about Prometheus with Tool. And if you go to the link at the top, you can find your way to the Sync book. And at the Sync book from the Sync Press, you can find all of the videos that David's put together, as well as a link right here to his art. If you click on the word art.
I think the art hasn't been actually showing up. We have to do some maintenance. Although if you do click on that art and then you click on one of the places where you can't actually see the art, but you click on where it says what the piece is, it'll actually take you to another website. It's the whole other thing. If somebody's interested in my art, I work at a print shop and I print these like massive posters that are, extremely detailed, beautiful pieces. I'm going to be working with Thomas pretty soon to get those on his website. In the meantime, if you are actually interested, we can discuss and I can show you pieces and we can work out our own thing. But yeah, I didn't realize that my boss's website has like not been working properly for like apparently at least over a year. And so like I had to have a talk with him about that. I'm like, dude, people keep telling me that the website's not working. He's like, oh, I haven't touched that at all. So in other words, I probably had customers and had no idea. But yeah, I do digital collage art and I print massive posters. I mean, they can really be any size. But yeah, anyway. Thank you.
All right. We love you all. We'll see you guys soon.